From camp, the hunters would range out into the surrounding woods laden with little or nothing but gun and bullet pouch. Perhaps it is from this the modern misconception of the long hunter derives, alone on foot in the midst of the wilderness with only his rifle and maybe a little jerky or cornmeal stuffed in his hunting shirt to sustain him. The fact that he had a rather large and well-stocked camp, as well as companions to return to for his evening meal and a night's sleep, seems to have been conveniently forgotten by modern writers. It would be well for the modern-day long hunter to reflect on the camp life of these men. Did one man remain in a camp to cook and work the skins while the others hunted, or did each man work his own skins and prepare his own meals? Unless some lost journal is found, questions like these cannot be answered, but I believe we can benefit from the asking. Probably the single most useful tool of the long hunter carried was the knife. Eating utensil, game skinner, rifle patch, cutter, last-ditch defensive weapon, whittling tool for utility or amusement, all rolled into one, with a blade length averaging between 6 to 10 inches. The long hunter's knife seldom saw a day pass where it was not used. The most common blades were imported from Europe and very cheap, though some were made in America as well. Both, but particularly the imported variety, were often sold without handles, which would be made and affixed by the owner. Given the long hunter's dealings with buckskin, it is no surprise that so many surviving examples of their knives have antler handles. Here was an ideal knife handle material. The core made it easy to bore out for the tang than wood, while the antler itself was less prone to split. Above all, it was readily available. The hatchet was second only to the knife. Here's the picture of two examples. This would be the knife, the old Bowie knife style maybe, and your hatchet. Tomahawk. The hatchet was second only to the knife in its general usefulness. Strictly speaking, a hatchet or axe was a belt axe carried by the white man. A tomahawk was an Indian weapon, although it was occasionally carried by whites as well. By the end of the 18th century, the terms were being used more or less interchangeably. Both Doddridge and Smith described the backwoodsman as carrying a tomahawk. Smith waxed eloquent on the tomahawk's being an instrument that serves every purpose of defense and convenience, being a hammer at one side and a sharp hatchet at the other. The hatchet was used to cut wood, dismember game, and erect shelter. Like the knife, it was also a weapon and a diversion. Doddridge described throwing the tomahawk as a boyish sport, where boys would amuse themselves by throwing their hatchets at trees while walking through the woods. Indians were at times reported to throw their tomahawks in combat, a practice that seems to have been reserved for fleeing enemies that would be brought down in no other way, and it is conceivable that whites may have done likewise. As mentioned in the chapter on clothing, both Smith and Dean described the tomahawk as being carried in the belt. Doddridge described both knife and hatchet as being carried on the belt. The hatchet was merely suspended from the belt. The knife was described as having a leathern sheath. I suspect the norm was that both were simply thrust into the belt without benefit of any form of attachment other than the pressure of the belt to hold them in place. Surviving knife sheaths tend to lack any kind of belt loop or have been unable to find references or examples of tomahawk sheaths prior to the 19th century. That doesn't mean that latter weren't used, but given the tomahawk's function as a backup weapon, I doubt it. Hunting bags or shot pouches are often mentioned in period writing, but I've yet to find a description of the appearance, use, or contents. This leaves us with a few remaining artifacts. This leaves us with a few remaining artifacts, some period paintings, usually of European gentry, and a lot of speculation on which to base my conclusions. I believe that the most common hunting bag was a simple affair, being a single ungusseted pouch with covering flap and a narrow strap, and with horn, with a horn being carried on a and with the horn being carried on a separate staff. That would be the powder horn. There are only a handful of American pouches properly documented to this period, and all of them are like this. The most complex bags and double pouches, inside dividers, gussets, pockets, cutout flap designs, patch, knife, and hatchet sheaths, attached powder horns, and such, which became common in the 19th century, may have existed earlier, but if so, I believe they were uncommon at best. Similar bags were certainly known to have existed in the 18th century, and their presence here is not unreasonable. Let me put it this way. I can't say with any conviction that the more complex bag is wrong, but I am certain the simple bag is right. I like how you put that. Let's see what we have here. Typical contents of the shot pouch would possibly include bullet bag, priming horn, if used. It was not uncommon to prime from the powder horn, toe for wiping the barrel, extra flints, and some kind of tool for changing them. Either a turn screw, which is a screwdriver, or possibly something similar to the musket tool used by the Army. Patches and patch material and grease might be found there, especially if the rifle lacked a butt trap or patch box, as might a cow's knee cover for the lock if rain appeared imminent. A priming wire or vent pick might be carried, although a feather would do the same job and was free for the finding. A small clasp knife and a turkey call would not be out of place. Bullet molds are often found in original bags, whether actually carried there all the time or simply kept there with the other articles associated with the care of the rifle when the bag was last put up. I don't know. The mold came with a rifle, so I think it is not unreasonable that a hunter would keep it in his pouch, leaving ladle and lead in camp, since these later items would be shared by the rest of this party. I already mentioned the tiny ladle for recasting spent bullets that may have been carried in the bag, but these are rare. If the above list sounds like a lot of probablys or mights and maybes, bear in mind that there were no more absolutes about what to carry and where to carry it than there are now. What one man put in his shot pouch, another might carry in his hunting shirt. Still another might leave the same item in camp or do without it altogether. My personal belief is that a man put in his shot pouch what he thought he'd need for the day's hunt and little else. Unless war parties were known to be in the area, they seem to be less worried about Indians than we are about burglars, at least while out hunting. Since hunting took place primarily during the winter months when war parties were rare, their lack of concern is easier to understand. In conclusion, I offer the following excerpt from the Pennsylvania Gazette as a sort of cap on the era of the Longhunter. It shows a country rich in resources and promise, a nation these hardy men helped to create. April 28, 1790, the Pennsylvania Gazette. Let's see what I have. This paper is concluded. It may be useful to recapitulate the various productions and exports of the United States, which are the sure foundations of a grand scene of agriculture, the resources for an extensive trade, and the materials for a great variety of useful and elegant manufactures. From our new country, we have a variety of skins and furs and ginseng. In the settled parts of the states, rice, indigo, cotton, silk, tobacco, flaxseed, wheat, rye, barley, oats, spelts, Indian corn, hemp, flax, wool, iron, lead, copper, coal, freestone, limestone, marble, sulfur, saltpeter, a great variety of ship timber, ship plank, masts, spars, tar, pitch, and turpentine, pork, beef, cider, fish oil, spermaceti, I have no idea what that is, well-bone, dried fish, pickled fish, hides, leather, black cattle, sheep, cheese, butter, tallow, hops, mustard seed, staves, headings, shingles, boards, plank, scantling, square timber, black walnut, wild cherry, and curled maple for cabinet wares, potash, pearl ashes, potter's clay, brick clay, with apples and all the other principal fruits, and potatoes and all the other principal vegetables. During the late war, considerable quantities of sea salt were manufactured on our coast as far north as New Jersey, and this article will no doubt one day become an object of attention. It may be safely affirmed that no European nation whatsoever unites in its dominions, even including their distant colonies, such a variety of important and capital productions. Nor can there be any doubt in the mind of a candid and serious observer that such a country must rise with common prudence in agriculture, manufactures, and commerce, affording to every industrious and virtuous citizen and immigrant the certain means of comfortable subsistence and the fairest prospect of establishing a family in life. Amen. This is a finishing note here. This is backward 10 years after. Has it really been 10 years since this was first published? No one is more surprised than I that this little effort has stood the test of time, particularly since it went to press not long after Mark Baker published what is, in my considered opinion, the definitive work on the Longhunter, Sons of a Trackless Forest. I truly expected my humble effort to languish in obscurity beneath its shadow. Unfortunately, Baker's work is now out of print and copies are scarce and very expensive. Meanwhile, demand for this little volume maintains a steady pace, and I hope it continues to serve as a useful introduction to the subject. Joseph Ruckman, Excelsior Springs, Missouri. Hope you enjoyed it. Love you. God bless.